Hey, everybody. I see we've got some people joining us. Thank you for fighting through some of those technical difficulties. We appreciate your patience. We're going to give a few more people an opportunity to join us today. We're up to 32 attendees. I believe we had as many as 74 registered. This event is being recorded, so we'll be able to get that to them if they're not able to log on. And again, sorry, we definitely had some technical difficulties as we all race to get on this morning. I've got 3 Zoom accounts open myself here, so pull this out. All righty. Well, we don't want to take up too much more of people's time because we got some really cool stuff that we want to get to today. And so I guess we'll go ahead and get kicked off. My name is Rashad Cobb, Community Engagement Program Officer for the Greater Green Bay Community Foundation. And today we are gathered to have a discussion around donor stewardship and donor engagement. This is a part of our nonprofit impact initiative capacity building work, which again is always going to be informed by you all, the nonprofit community. I know I sound like a broken record, but I must say it anytime I talk about it. We will never design programming because we believe it's what you need. We design programming based on what we hear from you. So when you see me or we're having conversations, please let me know what kind of capacity building topics would be of use to your organization and to you as an individual. Recently, there were a number of people who talked about donor stewardship and donor engagement being an area that they wanted to gain some expertise on. And so that's kind of what we decided to design here today. Some basic housekeeping. We've got the Q&A function is available. So if you have questions you want to drop in there, I'll make sure we try to get to those as well. Anything that we don't get to, I can commit to getting answers from our 2 presenters today. And then I'll get those answers out to anyone who registered. Again, this will be recorded. It's being recorded now. That'll be disseminated. And again, while we're here today, is to really talk about a couple of things. It is our sincere hope that when you walk away from this, you'll have a better understanding of what it means to build a culture of philanthropy within your organization, a little bit about engaging your board in your organization's donor plan, the benefits of and options for donor databases, which are really important, the idea of creating a stewardship plan, and then last but not least, some tips for building strong and engaging donor relations, which are important. And with that, I am going to stop the introduction and we're going to have the 2 panelists introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump into what we came to talk about today.
Christian, you can go first.
Okay. All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Christian Jensen. I'm the executive director of My Team Triumph. Founded the organization in 2010. And it was really a ground level startup organization at that point. We are a chapter of the national organization, but we came in at a time where there was no blueprint on programs and fundraising. And so I think part of what I want to bring to the topic today is, that younger, smaller to middle size. We're technically a middle size or a medium-sized organization based on our budget, but also outworked by the number of things that we do. So I'll come at this presentation with some of the things that I've learned as we've transitioned from being, since 2015, we transitioned from being a all volunteer to an organization that has paid staff, and how that evolved our donor stewardship and fundraising programs.
Thank you.
Awesome. And I'm Kara Gussie, the Vice President for Development and Communications at Family Services. And so where my team Triumph is kind of in that middle category, I guess you would definitely put Family Services in the large category. We are regional and been around for a long time. I think this is our 123rd year or something of Family Services in existence in some way, shape, or form. That's not to say that the fundraising has been around for 123 years, but we're constantly, and I think a point that Christian and I will make later is that no matter how old or young your organization is, we are always learning and always improving. No matter how sophisticated you think that other organizations are. I was just talking about this actually with my CEO yesterday, is that, you know, you put this comparison hat on and you're like, oh my gosh, I should be doing this because they're doing that. And you really have to look at your capacity. So we'll talk a little bit about best practices. Christian will like dial it down a little bit and say, well, this is what you can really do. And then I think what we're hoping is that you get a nugget or two to take away that you actually be able to implement today, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and then before we really get started into the actual topic itself, in the prep for this, the three of us had some conversations, and you know, you both said that it was really important that we maybe level set before we get started to really say that, like, for organizations that believe they have a robust donor engagement and stewardship plan, you may hear some things today that may not be of use to you, but there will be something that comes from it. But this is really kind of the 101. We know that there's more in-depth things that we can go into, but this may not be the best place for it given the time. But just know that we do have our nonprofit impact initiative major convening that will be coming up in the fall, and we'll be able to dive a little bit deeper. The other thing too is we want you to know we're going to be talking about, or they're going to be talking about, a lot of things today. But please keep in mind that there are economical, effective, and efficient ways to be intentional about starting this. Sometimes, you know, we feel like people may hear this information and all of a sudden start to think about the costs associated, and there are going to be some costs. But again, there are ways to do this economically, effectively, and efficiently. And then lastly, we're going to share a lot of different things today, but just please know that you do not need to jump in and do all of this today or tomorrow, but see where you can start. Start somewhere, commit to starting somewhere, track what you do, analyze it, and just kind of build from there. I think those are some of the most important things. So we didn't want anybody to feel like we were throwing you in the deep end and for you to say, oh my God, I need to be doing all of this stuff tomorrow. That is the end game and the end goal. But again, just today, take some time, understand your organization, your culture, and what are going to be those small things that you might be able, small was a bad way to say that. What are going to be those things that you can get started today that'll help you on the path to building out that stewardship and donor engagement plan that your organization not only needs, probably wants. And so with that, we're going to have Christian get started around the topic of building a culture of philanthropy.
All right. I'm going to be sharing some stuff on my screen here, guys. So it would be best if you go into speaker view up on the right so you can get full screen. So I want to kick it off just by asking you guys a question here. Who is on your development team? Now, do you see that? Is that flipped around, by the way?
That's good.
Or is that looks good? Great. Okay. Who is on your development team? I want to hear it. Go ahead, put that on in the chat. I want to hear what you guys have to say about that. Who are the people? Who are the individuals? Or who are the departments, if you will, that are on your development team? Would love to hear your thoughts on that. Our board, our ops director, all staff and board members I'm seeing. Good, keep it coming, keep it coming. Let's see it. Go ahead, put it in there. Fundraising committee, board, volunteers, participants. Everyone's job is fundraising. Loving it, loving it, loving it. I wish there were more, but this is me. I hear ya. Jeremy from Sunshine Health, just me. ED, marketing, education, awesome. So the true answer, this is kind of a trick question, is it's everyone, guys. Everyone is on your development team. So I want to talk about building a culture of philanthropy today. So I'm going to talk specifically initially a little bit about the board's role in philanthropy. This is something that I have really tried to dive into since we transitioned from being an organization that was all volunteers to those that are have a handful of staff. And we only have 3 staff at My Team Triumph, but we do about 70 in a normal year, about 70 events a year. We put on about 30,000 opportunities for our participants. So we do a lot of work, and fundraising is an essential thing, but we've always tried to ask ourselves, how do we maximize our efforts? So there's a few questions that I want to challenge you to ask yourself and ask your board or your team. And I'm going to go over some of those here as we start. So number one, let me back this up a little bit here, sorry. I want to go over some resources. Normally we finish with this, but I just want to put it up there on the front end. So these are things for you to look at later on. Purposeful Boards, Powerful Fundraising Presentation. If you've not seen this in person, Chuck's been around in the Green Bay area, the Fox Valley, a number of times. I've had the opportunity of hearing Chuck twice. Awesome stuff. A lot of what I referenced today is going to be his material. 12 Steps of Building a Culture of Philanthropy from philanthropy.com. We'll reference some of that. And then this video really rocked our world as an organization. If you've not seen the TED Talk by Dan Pallotta called The Way We Think About Charity is Dead Wrong, the next thing you need to do after this is go Google that video. It totally changed how we look at how we ask for money, how we communicate to donors and prospective donors, how we follow up on impact. And all of this builds into that culture of philanthropy, okay? So there's some resources that I want you to jot down here and take a look at those. And they're going to be great resources for you moving forward. Okay. Also, what makes a good board member from boardsource.org is another good one. Okay. Why a culture of philanthropy? Well, according to 2017 numbers, there was about $410 billion of charitable giving. 70% of that came from individuals. And what does that tell us? That we need to have a broad network, to have a wide spheres of influence and really utilize our entire organization to reach people, not just new people, but also to have an impact on those that I've already given. Development departments are typically siloed in charitable organizations from programs and marketing and leadership. This is unique to the philanthropy sector. If you think about for-profit organizations, a lot of times there's a really strong connection between advertising and products and services and delivery of those services. Everyone's working together, but for some reason in the charitable organizations, we tend to think, oh, you know, it's just Kara doing fundraising, or it's just this person doing fundraising. My job is programs, or my job is maintenance, or whatever it is, but it's really everyone's job and to be thinking about this. So for most orgs, fundraising means new donors, but retention has to be a top priority. We spend less money on retaining people than we do getting new donors. As I mentioned, donor stewardship involves the entire organization, and everyone in the organization has to have a strong belief from top down, board, staff, volunteers, that fundraising is part of your culture and to have a plan. We're going to go over some of that today. So let's get more into this. Here's some tough questions to ask yourself as an organization. Number one, do you refer to your organization as a nonprofit? Go ahead and put that down in the chat bubble there. Why do I harp on this? If you are, stop. I do it all the time, by the way, and I constantly am trying to correct myself. The reason why I put this on there is, what do people think when you discuss your organization as a nonprofit, especially when you're talking to them about doing business, AKA fundraising or asking them for money? It tends to communicate more about your organization than actually talking to them about your impact. So come up with other words, like we are a charitable organization, or instead of a nonprofit, we are a for impact organization. The way you think about your organization, the way you talk about your organization has a big impact on how you drive your mission. Number two, how does your organization view overhead in your budget? Is it something that is part of your overall delivery structure? Is it important? We live in a world where we are taught that overhead is non-essential and it can't be part of our fundraising structure because we don't like telling the story of overhead. It's not exciting. It's not sexy. It's not, it's hard to communicate the impact. Sometimes it's hard to talk about that with donors, but you have to look at overhead, or infrastructure, as I like to call it, as an essential component to your budget that which you have to raise money in order to do. Number 3, when someone asks you what you need the most, are you honest, right? Or do you answer that question based on what you think they're going to give you money for? Okay, so really having a hard sit down with your board around what is our really top need that we have, and let's communicate that story with donors. Our prospective donor or prospective board members talk to about fundraising before they're elected. Do you have this conversation, or do you sometimes fall in the trap of going, it's not that much work. We don't really want you involved in fundraising, the fundraising process, but you really hope they will. Are fundraising responsibilities and personal giving included in board expectations agreements? Does 100% of your board make a yearly stretch gift? Does the board chair and ED take time to personally cultivate and steward high value prospects and donors? Do they do this together? Is your mission statement clear, concise, and compelling? And can everyone recite it? That's a hard one. That if you went to a board meeting right now, or even your staff, and you say, hey, what's our mission statement? Less than half of your team would be able to recite it accurately. Do board member agendas prioritize fundraising? Okay, we're only going to be effective about the things that we talk about. If you don't talk about fundraising, if you don't have plans around it, if you just have hopes, then it's not going to happen. Are board members given a variety of options, which we'll touch on later, of being part of the fundraising process? There's a lot of board members that will say, I don't like fundraising, and they think we're asking them to make requests, but that's only one part of the fundraising process. There's so many more things that you can do, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Lastly, are efforts of board members for fundraising recognized? I remember we had a talk a couple days ago, and Kara talked about this, is do you thank and recognize your own team for the efforts they do? I know I sometimes struggle with that because I think that's part of the job, but you still need to give recognition to those people internally that are doing that hard work. So that's just a few basics on culture of philanthropy. I hope that you take some of that stuff to heart and it has a benefit to you. I'm going to turn it over to Kara, and she's going to talk about the recording aspect, right, of these donors. Looks like you're muted here.
Sorry, a whole over a year of doing this and I still forget to take myself off mute. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, one thing I wanted to add in a really practical tip into your conversation, Christian, about incorporating your board into your fundraising efforts. Obviously, I mean, whether you're big or small, I think incorporating your board, if you haven't done it already, into your stewardship plans is essential. And one of the things I think is so important, because that you want them to feel a part of your of the fundraising kind of cycle, and it actually gives board members something really tangible to do, something really interesting, because then they also get to go out and talk to some of the donors and learn about their stories. And one of the practical things that I wanted to just sneak in here about is that a lot of times when I ask our board to make fundraising calls, I will do a script for them, right? Because even thank you calls, and I shouldn't say fundraising, not solicitation, just stewardship calls. A lot of times people are still super nervous about getting, like, you don't talk on the phone all that much anymore, right? So it can be kind of nerve-wracking. So I always give them a script, and it's of course in my voice. So I encourage them to, make it their own. But a lot of times I think then these calls can still be kind of awkward for people. I don't know if you have done, these types of calls or not, but a lot of times this can be super awkward, right? So you call and you actually get someone on the phone and you're like, hey, I'm Kara from Family Services. I just wanted to let you know, I am so grateful for your gift that you just recently gave. It's so meaningful for us, and, thank you so much. And then they're like, okay, great, yeah, thanks. And then you're like, now what, right? It can be super uncomfortable. And so what I really recommend and what I try to do, and I recommend to coach your board members to do, is ask one or two more questions of your board, right? Have your board ask that donor, because that board member then will get a little insight as to why people are connected to this great organization that they're volunteering for. Have their board ask, so what motivated you to give this gift, that you just gave? Or what's your connection to our organization? Tell me a little bit about why you care about family services or My Team Triumph or whatever. And then hopefully they will, I ask all of our board members to write down, make little notes of the conversation, because they might learn something really interesting, right? They might learn something just kind of interesting about that person that you can come back later. And then you record those and record any of that conversation in. And what leads me to my next point, you hopefully will be recording that in your donor database. So again, now you've kind of have your overview of incorporating your board and building a culture of philanthropy. I have been struggling with that for years. We're a large organization. We have it's really hard, you guys. It is like you have every fundraising expert telling you, every fundraising expert telling you to build a culture of philanthropy. You will never be done building a culture of philanthropy. Okay. So we've got programs in 14 different counties. And I try to tell all of our programming people, you are an extension of the communications and development office, right? You are, look for potential donors or volunteers or any of that thing. But it's so hard for people, especially program people, to sometimes put that hat on and understand why donations make a difference and donors make a difference in their work. It's important, but it is never done. So even especially in a large organization, it's really hard to do. So certainly focus on that, but it will be a lifelong task. But so I wanted to go back then a little bit, and for a lot of us, when we're looking at our stewardship efforts, and especially when we have just done an event, like for instance, Give Big Green Bay, right? So we've got all these new donors that we need to do something with. And the only way my main point in this whole section is we are only as good as our data. If your data is all over the place and is not in a uniform format, and you've got, some names are not capitalized over here and then some are capitalized over here. Again, this goes back to the really big basics. You have to have your data uniform. So you want all of your addresses in the same format. You want all of your names and your first names in the same format, because there's a ton of competition out there, you guys, right? For our donations. And think about if you got a letter in the mail, even from an organization that you love, but your name's all wonky on it, or it includes your husband or wife's name, but not your name, or if it's not capitalized, and all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, so they don't even care about me enough to get my name right. So that's why the data part of it is so important, that you really need to find a way to keep that information really formatted correctly, and so that you can pull it out easily. I'm here to tell you, if you're using an Excel database, it's now time to stop and upgrade. You got to do it. Oh yeah, okay, Christine just said, I just had that happen. My husband's name was on it, but not mine, and I was the one who wrote the check, right? That's annoying. That's super annoying when you're like, God, why did they get that wrong? So that is super important. And so if you're using Excel right now, or a Word doc, or whatever you're using, it is time to invest in a donor database. There are lots of them out there. and I'm sure Christian or Rashad or I, if you want to follow up with us afterwards, we can talk about what options are. We won't go through them because there is nothing that's universally great for anyone. We're not being paid or sponsored by any donor database company. But you really need to do that because for instances just like Christine had mentioned, you have to get that part right. And if you're updating information in Excel, it's likely that you've got a couple of different Excel database, Excel sheets in different places. And so if you change information in one place, you better remember to change it in another place. And so this really just takes that part of it out, right? And really, when it comes down to it, and I know you all know this, time is money. So the less time that we spend on keeping our databases or keeping our Excel spreadsheets up to date and perfect, and how if it takes you a ton of time to mail merge and print your letters and do all that kind of stuff, a donor database or a CRM is what, the lingo is, that that will save you time in the end, which will allow you to spend more time to fundraise and make more money. And so many of these CRMs now will give you so many functions beyond just keeping your donor data well organized. Email functions and thank you letter functions and task reminders. And there's so many other things that will save you time and prevent you from making those really easy mistakes that could turn off a donor super easily. So that's my soapbox on donor databases. Christian, what do you want to add?
Yeah, Kara, I was going to ask you, when you're going through the process of, say, you're inputting data into your database, do you have like a process sheet? Do you have like a cheat sheet of like things that you do? I know I do this every time I go through it, like make sure I do this, make sure I do this, because we have a lot of different inputs. We have electronic ones that just automatically plug in. Then we have cash, we have checks, we have, all these different things. Like, do you have that that helps you make sure that data is clean?
100%. The other thing that I will really recommend you guys, have one person only that does your database input information, that is actually putting your donor database. Have that person be the owner of that process. So before I got here, they had a number of years ago, they had given some of that task to interns. Well, interns could care less whether they're doing it correctly sometimes. So we had to do a massive database cleanup because names were misspelled, or there was a couple of spaces in between first names and last names, and addresses weren't formatted correctly, and it wasn't good. So we had to do a big database cleanup. And so now we have one person that is she is like, do not touch my database. I'm not allowed. Right. I'm not allowed to input. I can do the basic changes if someone's phone number changes, but I am not allowed to go in there because I don't know the process. To your point, Christian, I don't know the process, all the intricacies and all the ins and outs of how she inputs it. So we are very, very careful about who is allowed to input information, because she knows the way to do it. She has her process written down, and that is the only way that we're allowed to do it. So we don't have volunteers, we don't have interns, we don't have anybody else but her input information input donor gifts into the database. Yeah.
And one thing I will say too, if you've not gotten a donor database yet, and you're like, oh, how do I start? A lot of the databases will help onboard you. You can either it comes with some of that in the initial purchase of the program. There's like, we'll do this, or you can purchase that additionally. They'll take your spreadsheets, they'll help integrate it and upload it and make sure it's clean. But the better your information is now, the less time that takes to get that going. So it is helpful. They do know that there's a lot of organizations that are just first kind of coming into it, and they will be able to help you get that data clean starting off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone had asked a question, if someone gives money anonymously, is that how you would input that in the database? You might have to clarify your question because I probably was saying something that now I don't know what you're referring to.
Yeah.
So let me know if you can clarify what your question is, we might be able to get back to that.
Perfect. What I wanted to see is if you all, you know, in our conversations leading up to this, you both were very, very emphatic about the idea of thanking donors being a must. You want to elaborate on that some?
Yep. Yeah. So I am, again, one of the things that the stewardship practices that are so essential are the basics, you guys. It doesn't have to be complicated. So every organization is thanking their donors, and I will tell you about best practices. So best practices in our industry is to get their thank you note out, which is your letter, your acknowledgement letter, which is also attached to, often has your tax receipt information on it, within 48 hours of receiving the gift. That's industry standard best practices. Do we always do that? Heck no. I have our data processing person right now is on quarantine because her husband has COVID. So like I am literally handwriting out letters today or envelopes. And but what we want to say about that is certainly don't let a month or two go by where you are not thinking or not getting that initial letter out, because again, we're all in competition necessarily sometimes with other organizations in terms of people are watching, people know that, after Give Big, some organizations had their, thank you letter out 2 days later, and some haven't gotten them out yet. So people, if they gave to multiple organizations, and most people do when they're philanthropic, give to other organizations, so they know they're watching. So just make sure that you can get those out as soon as possible, and spend some time thinking about how you want to get that accomplished, right? So maybe you need to use your board to assist with signing letters or making thank you calls, or getting your CEO or your volunteers or other people. So if you have a hard time, especially after a big event or something like that, getting that out, think about that process ahead of time and say, all right, how are we going to make this happen? Especially if you're a one-person shop, how am I going to do this? You got to prioritize that process, especially right after an event or right after any kind of gift. So that's a big deal. And again, if people are helping you, make sure that they have a script so they at least have a general idea of what you want them to say.
Yeah.
So, and then also, I think what you should do is give some thought as to how you want to provide a different level of stewardship to donors at different levels, right? So for us, we have our CEO signs like the largest gifts. So anything over $1,000, or even might even be $500, I think, the letter is signed by Jeff, our CEO. And then the next tier down, the letter is signed by me. And because again, like all of that, having one person, it might be overwhelming. But if you can kind of break it out into tiers like that, and maybe your fund development chair or your board chair could help sign the next tier, or all things like that. And then we also do that with other donor, follow-up, whether it's a thank you phone call or a handwritten note or anything like that. So I really encourage you to kind of take a look at your average sizes of your gifts, and then assign out, like, what are we going to do to treat these donors special, and these donors special, and these donors special, because they all are special. Yeah. But you might want to pay special attention to a certain category of your donors.
Yeah, and I want to add to that a couple quick things. Well, first, Christine asked a question about the anonymous donor. I think the anonymous recognition is really a public thing. If you have their information in your donor database that's private to your organization, you definitely want to log their information in your database. It also helps from an acknowledgement standpoint, and end of year tax receipts, they're going to want that. So we want their actual information in your database. It's just when you're publicly, posting or sharing or whatever, that's most of the time what they're referring to. I also think Car, what I thought about too is I think there's a difference between the donation acknowledgement and then just recognition or thank yous.
Yes.
So, you talk about the 48 hours, get that letter, that email out, thanking folks. But then I think where you could really use the rest of your team, whether it's on the board, are irregular thank yous. So one thing that you could do is every time you come to a board meeting, bring a list of maybe if you have a monthly meeting, bring a list of your donors and break that list up into, if you have 5 board members, divided by 5, have cards and envelopes, standard, you can do personal, you can like give organized letters. You can ask them to go and purchase their own thank you letters, and here's your list. Here's the address, here's the name, here's how much they gave. Maybe if there's a designation on there or a campaign they gave towards, helps give them more information. But that you can go with them every time. Hey, every month you've got 10 letters to write. That's a very simple way to do it. And one of the things I think that board members will really love, especially those that are reluctant to ask, is it's really great to say thank you, because you get feedback. Oh, when you say thank you to someone, oh, wow, thank you so much for calling me. That was totally unexpected. Or thank you for writing that letter. That leaves a great impact on the donor. And so it's one of those things that's like, not like you got to have that. It's super necessary to get that initial response out. But if you're not, you don't have to use your board members for that. Use the board members for some of those irregular, nice to have, over the top kind of friend raising opportunities.
Yeah, so to that point, I'm just going to address a couple of the questions where it says, Matt asked, if you get your acknowledgement letters out within 48 hours, then when should the stewardship phone call be made? That I think can be definitely more loosey-goosey in terms of whenever, and I would like with our fund development committee to make put a process into place, right? So where our board members will get a monthly report of all the new donors or all of the $1,000 and up donors or something like that. And so even if it's a month later, I think that's okay. I don't think there's any recommendation or something that the biggest thing is that they hear from you quickly after they gave their gift the first time. And when I say they hear from you, I mean that formal acknowledgement letter that is their tax receipt. That is the thing that's most important to get out within 48 hours. I think you work with your volunteers in terms of getting that thank you call or that individual thank you note. Someone else, Jeremy, said you recommending sending the letter and a handwritten note separate. I do, because those are 2 separate touch points. So you get your formal acknowledgement letter out, and then a few weeks later, or even the next month, you get a handwritten acknowledgement. They're like, oh, they're still thinking about my gift. How cool is that? That it's like yet another way to bring them closer to your organization. Yes. So yeah, I definitely think that's okay.
Yeah, thank you for that too. We had some discussion about the difference between stewardship and engagement, and I kind of want to transition into some discussion around engagement. And you both alluded to the idea of wanting to speak a little bit about what is engagement and why it's important.
Yeah, I'll kick this off. I've got a couple quick points again I want to put up here. So this is a quote from Dan Pallotta that's in his video. I think is really important. People are weary of being asked to do the least they can possibly do. People are yearning to measure the full distance of their potential based on the causes they deeply care about. So, never that, I remember that because sometimes we're afraid to, ask people for more or steward them up the chain, but that's really important thing to do. And what we're talking about, stewardship, is different than cultivation and solicitation. This is how you upgrade folks through the process, right? And, think about this as part of the friend raising process. These touch points that we're talking about just really helps solidify to these donors that we really care about what you've done. I want to share this graphic as well that kind of helps you get a visualization of the stewardship process. So, when you first do some of the fundraising, there's very kind of low commitment opportunities that you can engage with new donors, such as a special event. that ideally we want to transition to build, as you know more about these people, you're building a relationship and you're more personalizing where you can where you can have their gifts go towards, and then you can upgrade these folks into maybe recurring donors, capital donors, plan gifts, so on and so forth. So this is how you kind of learn and customize the approach with your donors. A little bit more on stewardship. How does your organization treat existing donors? Are they heroes? Do they feel valued and appreciated? Are you keeping them informed of their progress? Are they getting into your normal communication flow? It seems simple, but sometimes we don't add them to the print newsletter or the email newsletter, and that's part of what the donor database will help you do, and should automate that for you. What could you do better on stewardship? Can the board be more engaged? List ways that board could you use to help increase the quality of stewardship, such as those letters. People fail to give because they're asked infrequently, or they're given lack of information about where their gift is used and the impact on it. They never feel wanted or needed, or we never include them in asking their opinions about plans for the future. Like if you include donors, like, hey, what do you think about this? We want to build this new program, or we're thinking of doing a capital campaign. What are your thoughts about this? That really helps engage donors in a really deep way. So also you want to make sure that the appeals and the communications are very personalized, and ask them again. Don't be afraid to ask people again. Most people who've given once do give more than once. So that's a powerful thing to do. And of course, you have to acknowledge your donors. That's the basics of kind of what we're talking about here. So those are a few things. What do you think, Kara? Muted again.
I was typing and talking but I was like, oh my God, that's gonna be clicky in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing is that your donors don't only want to hear from you when you're asking for money, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to do that. So you just need to, and like you said, Christian, the biggest thing is to make sure that they understand and recognize the impact of their giving. What did they actually do? What did their money really do? And that doesn't necessarily mean that, they, bought a piece of equipment, mm-hmm. and so that, that's really cool, or it allowed you to bring on a staff person. But what mm-hmm. did that gift, or the fundraising efforts in general, what is that allowing you to do? It's allowing you to, what did that staff member that you brought on, what did they accomplish? What did they do? How did they help your clients? Storytelling is 100% the key to good donor stewardship communication and good. So when people aren't, again, they don't want to know that you bought a new printer copier. They don't want to know. Yeah. They don't want to know that. And those types of things, but how is their money actually affecting the people that you serve? And so sharing client stories, and it doesn't have to be this wild success story. It can be little improvements in someone's life. Yeah. And all of your donor communication that you're sending out, this is, if you can take one thing from this whole entire talk, it's not about your organization. Mm-hmm. Do not talk about your organization like thank you for your gift. You allowed us to do this and this and this and this. Mm. It is about the donor. That thank you letter, that donor call, that handwritten note, you should say you more mm-hmm. than we. It is all, make the donor feel like they were the hero, like you mentioned, of the day. So it's all, mm-hmm. you have to have way more you language in it. You allowed us to do this. You are helping us accomplish these things. Yeah. Instead of saying, thanks so much for giving to this organization. This is why we're awesome.
Yeah, I love that.
So, that is one of my like main things. And Tom Ahern is, one of the kind of donor communication gurus. So if you, Google him, and he even has a formula, like I think you can put in your thank you letter and it will look and say how many times you say we or us and how many times you say you, the donor. And it will help you say like, oh God, no, you need to go and say you a lot more. And that goes for any of your donor communication, your thank you letter, your newsletters, your emails. If it's donor communication, use the word you as much as you can.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to really talk about too, and this is a little tangential, but I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit. So we're gaining a lot of our donors from events, right? And events are a whole different webinar. And there's a lot of us turn to events first, but we can talk about that a different day. I don't think that necessarily should be our go-to, but in the reality, that is where a lot of us are getting our new donors, right? So a lot of us, I think, treat our event donors totally separately than the rest of our donors. So you're trying to figure out like, oh, I should only communicate to them about the event, or I should only like, okay, I'll send them the thank you. And then maybe, do I put them in my annual appeal list? Heck yeah. Yeah, absolutely. 100% put your event donors into every other list that you're sending, all of your donor communication, your general donor communication, your annual appeal list. Absolutely, they need to be in there. My opinion for an event is the whole reason you have an event is to introduce that donor to your organization and then bring them emotionally closer to the mission of your organization. Yes, some people are just coming because they want to attend your run or your walk. But if you can even convert a handful of those donors that come because they want to do your 5K to caring about your mission and giving the next time you ask during your annual appeal, that's the whole point. We're trying to bring them in and connect them to the greater good, not just to that particular one thing. So definitely bring them in and communicate with them in as many ways as you can. Again, show your impact and ask them for money outside of the event. That's the whole purpose of the event, was to try to bring them in. So that's my little soapbox there.
I love it. And there's ways to automate that too. I think, your email newsletter database, you can have different automated flows that you can set up, putting people into groups that will take people down a path, a journey. That's a little bit more complex that, requires a little bit more learning on, but it is doable. And there is a way to make something very personalized, automated with great technology out there, like your database.
Yeah.
And that'll come through the donor database, Christian?
Sometimes it depends on the database. Sometimes they have those types of automations. Otherwise, you may have to use an external email newsletter system like MailChimp or Constant Contact or whatever. Most of those have those kinds of things set up, and your database usually syncs with those. So as you add people to your database, it should push them over to that system and then into those groups.
So it really sounds like there needs to be some thought given to how you'll communicate, whether it'll be email, newsletter, get into understanding of what the capabilities of your donor management software is, and then really trying to build in some level of accountability around who's going to handle that and how will your board and as such be involved. And I think you two gave some real good examples about how board members who may be afraid to ask for money can still play a role in fund development, which is important. One of the things I wanted you all to maybe just touch base on a little bit, you alluded to it when you spoke, was talking about bringing donors in. And so you capture a donor at an event, and then you kind of alluded to this idea of bringing donors in. What do you mean by that?
So I can touch on that a little bit. And what I mean by that is that, people attend events for all sorts of reasons, right? Obviously, your board members are going to be going to an event because they care about your organization, but the people that they bring to their table might just go because they want to have a fun night out. or because a friend asked them to, or because they want to participate in some, if it's an athletic like focus thing, they want to do that. The biggest thing for us is that we need our donor communications to be compelling and interesting, because we want the person that went to the event to understand that what they came to is beyond just our event. And we want them to show them why they should care and why what they supported is worth their time and worth their money. So the whole purpose, and so bringing them in means, and I think Christian, you can probably allude to this even more, like I can't, with the nature of our work, we can't utilize volunteers as much as we would like to. We've got a lot of confidentiality issues and things like that, but I know you guys are so tapped into your volunteers and utilize those. So it's really about communicating with those event people and then trying to incorporate them somehow, whether that's in giving again or asking them to volunteer. You can probably touch on that better than I can. Now you're on mute.
I always say that involvement leads to investment, and the more that you involve people, the more they feel that they're part of the mission. We talk about communication a lot through this webinar, and that's really kind of getting people involved in the story from afar, through digital means or through a phone or a letter or an email. But if you can involve them at an event, that gets them in the story in person. That's the Like if they can meet and see and touch the mission, that's the most valuable thing that you can do to get them into that. Sometimes the event is usually just like a first initial connection. It's a gala or something like that. They're going to hear a story. They may be motivated to kind of do more. So the more that you can get people involved in that, the better it is, and the easier it is then to kind of steward them as well, because they'll often, what you want through the involvement is that if you present opportunities about needs that you have, they'll come to you versus you have to go to them. So I think you got to have some ways that you can get people involved.
Thank you for that. We've got a lot of questions, which is awesome. And I think we're going to run out of time when it comes in terms to being able to answer them. But I promise you all, I'm going to copy those questions and share them with the presenters today, and we'll get answers sent out to everyone. But there was one specific question that I wanted to ask the both of you while you're here, because I think it's a question that a lot of people may have. And it essentially is, what is the best way to break the ice with the board about becoming more involved in fund development? And what are some other fund development ideas? I guess I kind of want to start by saying you just have to do it. You can't make it be that elephant in the room that you don't address. But let's hear from the professionals around that one.
Yeah, I'll start. It's a tough conversation. I think what you have to go into it is, if you're like the ED or if you're the board chair, depending on your role, if you're initiating that conversation, some people don't have that passion. You have to be clear about this is a priority that you have. Also offering different ways that they can be involved in the process, knowing that, hey, based on your skill set and your interest, you may be involved in the thanking and the asking and the volunteering or whatever it is. You have to, start that, but you have to start somewhere. You have to put down on paper, this is our board commitment. We have a sheet that we have. This is the annual board commitment. We review that every year with them. We have them write down their personal goals related to those development efforts. And then we review that every year. So as much as you can have, like, here's the overall goal, how does that fit into what you want to do personally? Have them write that out. And then you're not saying, hey, I need you to call, I need you to write letters. You're saying, what do you want to do? And you're asking them to develop that goal.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. You got to set the expectation from the beginning. However, a lot of you probably don't have that expectation right now, right? So now you're like, all right, so so moving forward, I would create something like that. So any new board member that comes on, you have an expectation that they are going to participate in fund development in some way. Now, one thing that we did a couple of years ago with our board is that, I can give a little fundraising speech at a board meeting, right? I could give a little training and say, this is what you should or could be doing. but they know that I'm paid to do that. So what I think is effective is find an ally on your board or even outside of your board who gets it. So is there one person on your board that totally gets it, that the other board members view as a peer? Or is it a longtime volunteer that totally gets it, that would be willing to work with you to do a little peer training for your board? So it's not coming from you, the paid person, it's coming from someone they respect. And then you can coach that person and work together and say, hey, would you kind of do this little board training for me? And you get up and say, and then help them with their craft, their message. And then they get up and say, this is important, you guys. This is why we need to be doing this. We care about this organization. We need to be 100% invested. And these are the things that we can do. These are the things that I've been a part of on other boards. This is what I'm seeing other organizations doing. This is what we need to do. And so it coming from them sometimes can be that inspiration and that motivation and that like, you're right. He or she's right. Yep, I got to be doing that, rather than it feeling like a lecture coming from one of us.
Yeah, I really appreciate those contributions. And other things that I've seen that have been effective is just really having some sense of what kind of accountability you're going to have in place there. I think you really set the tone when you extend an invitation for people to be on your boards. If when an individual asks how important is fundraising and you kind of sweep it under the rug, like, well, it's not that big of a deal, you set that expectation. And so initially, when you're making that invitation for someone to join your board, that is your first opportunity to really emphasize how important it is that they participate in some aspect. Again, you both alluded to it earlier. It may not be someone giving you a list of people to contact. It may not be someone making those calls to make asks. It can be follow-ups. It could be you putting your signature on letters that are generated by the organization. There is a way for every single one to be involved and at a level that is comfortable to them, but also beneficial to the organization as well. And so I think that was kind of some of the biggest things he brought out. Well, what I want to do here is make sure that we end on time. Time is the most valuable thing that people have. We're wrapping up here in the last 30 seconds, but I did promise to you all, there are a lot of questions. So thank you for those questions. I'm going to get those copied and share them out with our two panelists today. And I'm going to give them some time. They're also really busy people who took some time out of their schedules to be here today to share, but I'll give them some time to respond to those answers. And then when we send out the link of the recording, we'll just include some follow-up with those questions and their specific responses as well. But if at any time you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. I can speak for you, Kara, because I know that you welcome people reaching out to you about this kind of stuff all of the time. Christian, I don't want to throw you under the bus. If that's your reality, then please let people know that they can. But feel free to do so. That's another thing I want to tell you all as nonprofit professionals. One thing that I absolutely love about this work is that your peers do want to help you. If you're new, people remember what it was like being new and not knowing how to do this stuff. If you're a veteran and just kind of maybe let this stuff slip by you, there are people who can relate to the fact that, hey, maybe I didn't get a start on this right away when I should have. So just know that nobody's judging you. We're all in this together. Everyone wants to support people. And that's what I've always felt and seen and heard when it comes to this nonprofit work. So please lean on your peers and ask those questions. And with that, we're going to close out. Much love to you all. We'll be in touch with more programming through the Nonprofit Impact Initiative, which is our capacity building work. And if you have any other questions, feel free to give me a holler. All right. Take care, everybody.